From the Weekly Standard, our friend Mark Hemingway joins us. Mark, how you doing, sir?
I'm doing great.
Have you recovered from the NRA annual meeting?
It was quite an event. I mean, the size of that convention, I've never seen anything like it. I mean, there are literal acres worth of stuff to see. I mean, I was on the convention floor for probably 8 hours, and I don't think I saw everything.
Yeah, I know, it's amazing. As I said right before we took a break that I did not even realize that you were going to be covering the NRA annual meeting for the Weekly Standard. So Sunday morning, when I looked up and I saw you, it took me a second because, I'm used to seeing you here. I'm not used to seeing Mark Hemingway in Texas. So I was like, wow, that guy looks a lot like Mark, and he's saying hi. Hey, that's Mark Hemingway. But, now officially, I guess we could say everybody goes to the NRA annual meetings now.
Yeah, no, I mean, really, there was 86,000 people or something?
86,288 to be exact, yes.
Absolutely incredible turnout. I mean, and I guess it's not to be, too shocking when you consider the NRA has, 5 million members across the country. But yeah, I mean, it really is an event, and it covers all sorts of different things. I mean, I was sort of surprised. And sort of the depth and breadth of all the things. And there's displays from gun manufacturers and other things like that, but there's also all sorts of things involving, charities and, hunting programs and, competition shooting programs and all sorts of other things. It touches a lot of different areas.
Well, yeah, so this was your first time to an NRA annual meeting. Did you have any idea in your head of what you were going to see and what you were going to find? Did you think or think you knew what it was going to be about?
Yeah, I had a feeling it would be big, and but unlike most journalists, and I own a few guns and I know how to operate them. So I think I had a more expansive and generous idea of what the NRA was about than most people that would go into a convention of the NRA for the first time. But that said, I mean, again, you have an organization that represents 5 million members. I mean, I don't think people who think they know what the NRA is about would do very well to go to the NRA convention. I think they'll be surprised by the number of different causes and areas where the NRA is involved and sort of touches aspects of American life.
Yeah, absolutely. And across the street from the NRA annual meeting, did you spend any time with the several dozen or so protesters who were out there?
Actually, I didn't spend much time at all. I saw them, and I've covered a lot of protests before, and frankly, here's the thing. I can't remember, there was an NPR piece about the convention, and I can't remember, the headline was something about, quote, dueling narratives at the NRA convention. Well, there was 86,000 people inside the NRA convention hall, and then across the street, you had about anywhere from 20 to 40 people, depending on the time of day or whatever, holding up anti-NRA signs that looked like your typical protest crowd. So, in terms of dueling narratives, duel implies sort of there's a fair fight, and the reality is that the anti-gun forces just were almost literally non-existent at this thing, and to pretend that at least for this occasion they represented a significant force that was shaping somehow public perception of the event is just absolutely, utterly laughable. And I remember the first thing that happened to me when I arrived at the press room at the NRA, and I picked up my press credentials, and I sat down, and the guy next to me was, of course, transcribing a bunch of quotes to his editor, a bunch of quotes he'd taken from people across the street.
Right.
Clearly, journalists there were spending a lot of undue time and attention focused on the protests. And I'm not saying they shouldn't talk to people; they absolutely should.
Mm-hmm.
But to say that the ink that was spilled on the protesters versus what was going on at the convention was disproportionate would be an understatement.
No, I think that's absolutely true. A lot of it was fascinating. I don't know if this was just where the satellite trucks were told to park, but all of the satellite trucks were parked right next to the protesters. And there was a ton of media attention there, as opposed to, not that there wasn't media attention inside the room, but what's fascinating is when the mainstream press bothered to cover the annual meeting, they would cover 30 seconds of something Glenn Beck said. Or they would cover 20 seconds of something Sarah Palin said. And that's not, I like Glenn Beck, I like Sarah Palin, but taking a snippet of their speech is not going to provide you an overview of the NRA annual meeting. It's just not.
Yeah, and when I wrote about it, I mean, this was the issue that I sort of tried to address. You know, you really see the media's partisanship here pretty clearly whenever it comes to writing about the NRA, because, you know, whether you like the NRA or not, I mean, you should concede that, you know, this is with an organization with 5 million members. I mean, they are one of the largest grassroots organizations in America. You know, so when the NRA speaks on an issue, you know, they have legitimate support behind this thing. I mean, this is not an insignificant number of Americans, and further, the number of Americans that are NRA members, I think, are representative of a much larger number. So the idea that somehow this is a, you know, a select bunch of, you know, gun crazy yahoos, you know, out there, you know, with their narrow special interest agenda is just laughable. There are no other, you know, grassroots organizations, I think, frankly, anymore that are as credible in terms of the public support that they can drum up. You know, even AARP lost a lot of credibility during the Obamacare debate. So there just really is, you know, no equivalent of the NRA in America, and you really need to acknowledge it as a force in that regard.
You know, and what's funny is when we almost have the opposite happening. Like when the NRA sponsored the NASCAR race, the NRA 500, down at the Texas Motor Speedway, you had Chris Murphy write to NASCAR and write to Fox and demand that they not allow the NRA to sponsor the race, and then he demanded that Fox not air the race or avoid saying NRA because he said they would only give this organization the legitimacy that they want. No. The NRA is a legitimate organization. That's the narrative that these gun control groups are trying to push here, is that the NRA is somehow illegitimate with 5 million members, with a growing membership, with 86,000 people attending their convention in Houston, Texas. I mean, how do you make that case that the NRA is an illegitimate organization?
Well, you don't, and you also have to bear in mind here that, you know, I really can't think of a voice that is frankly more illegitimate on the gun issue than Chris Murphy. Now, I do recognize that, you know, he represents Connecticut, you know, where Newtown occurred, and I'm sure he has a number of constituents that support him, you know, in his anti-gun crusade. But you also have to bear in mind that this is a guy that just went on MSNBC and said, quote, "The Second Amendment is not an absolute right, not a God-given right. It has always had conditions upon it like the First Amendment has. The idea that the Second Amendment was put there in order to allow citizens to fight their government is insane. The Second Amendment is not designed to allow the citizenry to arm itself against the government." I mean, that's a quote from him. And I mean, that is so divorced from, you know, reality on so many levels, you know, denying the origin of natural rights, and then saying that it is unthinkable that the founders of America, who took up arms against their own government, would put the Second Amendment in place to do the same thing in the event that our country, you know, encountered similar turbulence. So I mean, I just, again, this speaks to what I'm talking about in terms of legitimacy. I mean, when Chris Murphy said this on Rachel Maddow's show, I mean, it barely registered a blip in the national media. I mean, it's frankly insane rantings. I mean, there's totally divorced from reality. I appreciate, you know, that he's got a point of view politically, and I appreciate that he represents a lot of constituents who are anti-gun because of the tragedy that occurred in their state. But that said, that does not give you the right to go on TV and say things that are untrue and accuse people who don't agree with your patent untruths as being insane. It's not okay. So, you know, again, it goes back to who is the more credible voice here. You know, it is absolutely unbelievable to me that there's all these forces in the media and in Washington running around saying the NRA is an illegitimate organization full of people that want to kill your children, when they themselves are plainly not credible whenever they speak on the issue of guns. It's just absolutely mind-boggling to me.
So do you see this, I mean, because again, you know, Vice President Biden, Senator Manchin, President Obama, all of them say they want to bring this issue up again, perhaps before the end of the summer mark. So, you know, with this, and I agree with you, you know, there's been no, look, there has been no grassroots outcry from Americans. Where's our gun control? Darn you, Senate, for not passing gun control. I mean, I've missed it if there has been.
Yeah, well, you know, it's funny you say that because, I mean, look, I'm not advocating for any new gun control laws. Let me be perfectly clear about that. But I would also say that I can envision a scenario where people in Washington come together and pass some, you know, expanded background checks or any number of new gun laws. But what I can't fathom is that happening under the current climate. And even Joe Manchin, who's behind Manchin Toomey, recently said that the problem for forging compromise on these issues of the gun laws, like expanded background checks, that Manchin supports, is not the pro-gun folks. In fact, he says there's some stuff in the bill that the NRA likes. He says the problem is the anti-gun people. He says that they are, going around, they're like running ads against red state Democrats who, to like Bloomberg's group, and they're doing all these things to just poison the well, and they're spouting off like Chris Murphy, and they're just totally delegitimizing their side in the view, in the eyes of the people that, they have to win over in order to compromise on this thing. And again, I just don't know how you forge compromise on these things when one side is just constantly poisoning the well, and worse, just is totally ignorant of guns, isn't interested in gun culture, isn't interested in the people that own guns, and isn't interested in accurately reporting on who these people are and what they're about.
Absolutely. Well, listen, Mark, I'm glad that you were there. I'm glad that you wrote about it. It was a great piece. And you think you'll be going to Indianapolis next year?
I don't know. I haven't thought about that.
Well, I'm sure that there'll be a lot of competition there, the Weekly Standard, on who gets to go and fondle the hardware. So put in your request now.
Yeah. No. Well. Yeah. It was quite an event. I'll tell you that.
Well, listen, I'm glad you could come on the show today, sir. Thank you again, and look forward to having you in studio again before long.
Yeah. Absolutely.
All
Good
right,
talk to
Mark.
you, Cameron.